going to be recording this session, and if you do not want your picture to be during the recording, you can turn your camera off. If you don't mind, then you'll be there for posterity. So if any of you loses the connection at any point, don't fear, we'll still be here to let you back in. And if not, you can always write to us and we can give you the link to listen to this lecture later on. So once more, welcome everybody to this session. We have a very interesting topic for you today, and in change management. And with us is Ms. Paulette Woolf. She's an independent consultant in organizational change management, and she is also President of Woolf Strategies. She has over 20 years experience establishing and directing global internal management consulting functions for the United Nations, as well as many other public and private organizations. Ms. Woolf has held executive board positions in a number of professional organizations such as Intergovernmental Audit Forum and the Association of Internal Management Consultants in the United States. And she's a frequent lecturer in the field of change management, audit, consulting, contracting, and performance measurement. She holds a master's degree in public administration from NYU's Warner Graduate School of Public Service. And of course, Paulette works whenever she's able with Mashaf on our programs with MCTC. So welcome, Paulette. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. And I hand you this beautiful class and wonderful people to you.
Thank you, Nuria. Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad that you've decided to share an hour with me in discussing organizational change management, which is, I believe, a very timely topic as we have been experiencing significant change in recent times. Why don't we start with looking at a quote from Woodrow Wilson, who was a president in the United States, where he said, if you want to make enemies, try to change something. And as I like to say, everybody wants change so long as everything stays the same. But seriously, let's just talk for a minute about what we're going to do over the next hour. We have an hour for something that would normally be at least a 3-day course. I want to at least try and provide you with the basic concepts of change management. And what you're going to be seeing is a combination of best practices from the literature that's out there, and also based on my, as Nuria said, over 20 years experience at implementing change around the world. So we're going to start out by talking about what makes this time period challenging. And if you were in a room with me under normal circumstances, if we were in a room together, I would ask everybody to, give me some answers. But today what I'm going to have to do is give you answers that I normally get. So instead of interacting, you're going to have to see my face and hear my voice for a long time. But obviously, the elephant in the room, the coronavirus, has made this time period challenging. And also what's been happening in the United States and in other countries with Black Lives Matter is hopefully the beginning of a lot of changes that we're going to see as well. And we're going to have to adapt to new realities. Just some examples that I put relating to the coronavirus is, we have to do social distancing, we have to wear masks, no hugs or shaking hands. And these seem like pretty simple things, but if you want to see how difficult change can be, try taking your wastebasket from the side of your desk that it currently sits on and move it to the opposite side and see how long it takes you before you stop throwing to the original side. And that's a relatively minor change. And in change management, especially in organizational change management, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, these are not relatively minor change. even wearing masks, which seems like a relatively minor change, you see how difficult it is for people to remember and to do it and whatever. Now, we go through change all the time in our lives. Everybody does it. When you take on a new job, when you move to a new house, when you move to a new city, people here in Israel, when they're making Aliyah, these are all changes. And we know what's involved in those changes, trying to remember, to turn off the electricity in one place and turn on the heat in another one. The difference with organizational change management, what we're going to talk about today, is it's actually the same methodology, but being done on a larger scale with an entire company. So it encompasses communication and procedures and processes. And that's what we're going to talk about, change management, but within an organization. And we're going to also talk about organizational culture and what that means. And sometimes you'll hear me referring to it as structured change management, which is interchangeable, which I use interchangeably with also organizational change management. One of the things that I'm going to do today to try and get the different points across is use some case studies. The first case study that I'm going to use is from the United Nations. Everything I use is things that are out there in the public knowledge. This was a General Assembly report, so I'm not giving away any confidential secrets. You probably recognize these, I'm losing the word, these security kiosks that people use to go through. They're very common now. Back in the early 90s, they were not so common. The United Nations had decided that they wanted to put them in because the technology was available. And what we find a lot in change management is management will decide to do something or make a change because of the technology. And what they forget about is the people side of things. And in this case, they started to put in these kiosks, but they didn't use any of the change management methodology. So they didn't tell anybody what they were doing, why they were doing it, how they were doing it. And because they didn't tell anybody what was happening, then the rumor mill started, the informal network, as we like to call it. And all of a sudden, people were up in mutiny. And they said, management is going to be tracking our every move. They're going to know when we go to lunch and how long we go to lunch for and when we go to the bathroom. And then the diplomats said, we're diplomats and we don't have to use this system. And the whole thing was such a disaster that they end up having to take it out, cancel the contract, and it cost the UN 1.5 million, which, by today's standards is not a lot, but in those days was a lot of money. They were so traumatized by the event that it took another 20 years before they were even willing to bring it up. But then they had learned their lesson, and they really instituted a lot of the change management techniques. The communication was incredible. There were emails and there were posters and there were town hall meetings. And they said, this is what we're doing and we're doing it for security reasons and this is when we're going to start doing it, and really gave a lot of information. And the second time around, it went very smoothly. Okay, so if you get one piece of information out of today, like I'm being very modest, if you get one piece of information, it's that a change management is a process, not an event. So what do I mean by that? Well, any of you who have partners or spouses or children, have you ever said to a kid when they come home from school, please don't leave your book bag on the kitchen table? And it would be great if the first time you said it, like magic, they didn't do it anymore. But human nature is not like that. It takes a long time for people to internalize a change. So I'm going to give you an example of what I'm talking about. And this is seatbelts. Again, something which everybody takes for granted today, but there was a time where people didn't use seatbelts. In 1998, compliance was 69%. And then 10 years later, it was 88%. So what happened? Well, in change management, as in other areas, you have a carrot and a stick approach. What do I mean by that? The carrot is raising awareness, letting people become familiar with the benefits. Well, again, why are we doing this? What is the problem that we're looking to solve? So there were radio campaigns and ad campaigns. And the stick was if you didn't put on a seatbelt, then you would get a fine. Now, today, almost nobody would think of getting into a car without a seatbelt, but there was a time where this was a change that people had to internalize. And from 2004 to 2008, the statistics showed that it saved more than 75,000 lives. Now, again, if we were in a classroom together, I would ask you, what is a similar situation that we're dealing with today? And the answers that I've gotten in the past have to do with texting and driving, obviously, talking on the phone and driving. In the past, we've dealt with drinking and driving, but these are all things, these are changes that we've had to institute over the years. The other one, the obvious one, is smoking, where it used to be that you couldn't go into a public place without, being choked with smoke. And today, if I went to a mall here in Israel, I don't think anybody would think of lighting up. But these are changes that take place. And the reason that I'm spending a lot of time in emphasizing that is that any of you who become involved in a change need to understand that nothing happens overnight. Changes take a long time to internalize. If you have questions about anything that I'm saying as we go along, please feel free to write in the chat room. Okay, so now we're saying, what is the risk when you change the system but not the organizational culture? And we're going to talk about what do we mean when we talk about organizational culture. What do we mean by that? Organizational culture are the values and the behaviors that make an organization unique. So if I were to say to you, what do you think the organizational culture is? What are the values of a Wall Street firm? I would guess that a lot of you would say making money, okay? If I were to say, what is an organizational culture of a hospital? You would probably talk about saving lives. So every organization has values, and then they have behaviors that are associated with them. But there's a lot of reliance today on, as I mentioned earlier, technology. And a lot of the change management projects that I get involved with have to do with technology and systems and software. And a lot of times managers, upper management, senior management, believe that if all they do is put in the software, then all the other changes will come about. But that's not the case. You also have to change the organizational culture. And the truth is, if any of you have been involved in something like this, you will know that it's much harder to change the people side of things than it is the process or the procedures. So again, I have another case study that I'm going to use about an organization that I worked with that put in a system, and then they thought that everything was going to be paperless because you had the process flow and it was all done within the system. But what they didn't do was change any of the procedures around it. So they still accepted memos. So managers continued to print memos, continued to sign memos, continued to file them manually in file cabinets. And because a lot of these managers did not trust the new system, they continued to maintain their separate Excel spreadsheets in their offices. So not only did the organization not achieve the efficiencies that they thought they were going to achieve, but they ended up having duplicate work. So an organizational culture, when you start a change, and we're going to get into this later when we talk about buy-in, you have to identify what are the changes that are needed within the organization that are preventing you from achieving peak efficiency and effectiveness. One more quick example that I'm going to give you, and I'm going back in time again to a space rocket that's called the Challenger that was a major disaster. This was in the mid-'80s. It had a teacher on board, And it turned out there were a lot of investigations. This happened in the United States, and there were a lot of presidential commissions and a lot of investigations to try and figure out what happened. And among other things, one of the things that they found out that the organizational culture at NASA was not to give the boss bad news. You didn't want to tell them bad news. So whereas some of the engineers knew that there were problems with what they called the O-rings, and don't ask me what that is because I'm not an engineer, they didn't want to bring it up because that was the organizational culture. So they had to bring in consultants to try and change that. So as soon as things were identified, problems were identified, right away it got raised to the right managers and hopefully were addressed and resolved. Okay, I hope that's clear to everybody. If you have any questions, let me know. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about stakeholder feedback. And again, if we were together in a room, I would ask you for what your definition is of a stakeholder. And I always get many, many different definitions. But mine is basically anybody who has anything to gain or lose as a result of the change. Those are the people whose input you want to get, and you want to get it early in the process. You want to get it early in the process because, again, if you're putting in a new system and you don't find out what reports people are going to need, and you wait until the very end of the process, and then somebody comes along and says, I need you to be capturing this type of data or this information, it's a little late. To make the changes now are going to be expensive or time consuming. You may not hit your deadline. So you always want to get as much input from as many different kinds of stakeholders. So that could be staff, that could be vendors, that could be your governing board, that could be your customers or your clients. Really anybody who's going to have any and who's going to be impacted on by this change. And again, I have an example for you. Why does it matter? Because sometimes when you have something on paper, you think it makes sense, but later on it doesn't always translate well. And the example I've picked for today, I don't know if you recognize these glasses, but these are 3D glasses that people go to the movies and they watch these 3D movies. And then a few years ago, a couple of the major manufacturers came out with 3D, 3D TV. And that didn't do as well. And what they found was that people are willing to wear these clunky glasses for an hour and a half or so when they're in the movies. But when they're home, they're not going to be willing to wear them all day and walk around and put them on and take them off. So possibly they didn't do enough advanced research to figure out if something like this would succeed. I don't know, I wasn't involved, but this is what I read about it. But when you're doing any kind of major change, the more feedback you get, the better off you're going to be, the better your change is going to be. Okay, so now we've talked about that when you have data and you know that that change is going to improve the situation because you've made the effort to communicate to people, we are putting this change in place because this will improve the way we work, this will improve our process, we'll get more customers, we'll make more money, or we'll provide better services, or whatever it is. So then you say, well, why don't people change? You know, if somebody is a diabetic and they know that they need to take insulin or they need to stay away from sugar or whatever, and if they don't, they're going to get sick. Why don't people change? So again, I'm going to give you an example with smoking. So many people still smoke today. Granted, a lot of people don't, but there's still quite a few people who smoke. And now we have all the data and we have the statistics and we know that it causes lung cancer and emphysema and all kinds of terrible things. So you might say, well, if we know all these things, how can it be that people still smoke? It doesn't make sense from a rational, logical point of view, right? And again, this is where change management comes into play, because there's a principle in change management called certainty now beats uncertainty later. So what do I mean by that? Well, if I have a craving, if I'm addicted to cigarettes, okay, and if I light up a cigarette, what do I know for certain? I know that I'm going to satisfy my craving, right? What is uncertain? The uncertainty is that I'm going to get cancer or that I'm going to get emphysema or something's going to happen to me. I might get it or I might not get it. And most people will say to themselves, I know that people get cancer, but it's not going to happen to me. And anyways, even if it does happen, it's very far down the road. So this is an example that you can understand why people, we're always saying, why doesn't that person lose weight if they know all the impact? And even now, in the days of coronavirus, you look around and you say, well, masks, they say masks are helpful. And yet I walk on the street and I see so many people not wearing masks. That's the uncertainty. The certainty is it's going to help. But the uncertainty is, so I may not want to wear a mask because it's uncomfortable. And I might think, well, I'm not going to be the one that's going to get the virus. And even if I do, it's in the future somewhere. It's not in the here and now. Okay, I hope everybody is clear on this, because this is something that when you work with people throughout the change, you really need to understand that this is something that people think about. We are going to have time at the end for any questions. We'll have about, I think, 15 minutes. Okay. So now I keep talking about this structured change management approach as opposed to just doing something on your own when you need to change. So what is the benefit? Well, there's a few things. First of all, as I've mentioned, it's a proven methodology. You can go out and look at all the literature on there. It's also an easier way to get to the desired state. And the desired state is just one of the terms that are used in change management. The end state is another way of referring to it. But of whatever we've defined as what we want to achieve, what our goal is, this is an easier, quicker way to get to it. And we talked about people. People during a change are very anxious, very, very anxious. Even if they're not involved in the change, just knowing that there's a change, people get very anxious. So this is a way to reduce anxiety. And we're going to talk about specific ways to do that and make it less adversarial. And it's also a solution. And as I mentioned, you raise and resolve issues earlier in the process. You don't get to the end and find out, oh, we forgot to include this, or we forgot to make this kind of change. All right. And then here's your requisite chart, because you're not allowed to do a presentation. Presentation 101, you have to have your chart. It's a little bit difficult, but the only thing I want to show is that whenever we start a change, everybody's always very excited and very enthusiastic, and there's rah-rah, and this is going to be wonderful, and it's going to help us so much, and it's going to be great for the company or the organization. And then what happens? Somebody gets pulled to a different assignment, and then somebody else goes out on maternity leave, and then other priorities come along. And as soon as you hit the first obstacle, all of a sudden, a lot of times the change comes to a complete halt. In the past, when I've done this again in a room, I can see people nodding their heads because they've experienced this. Managed change helps you get through a lot of that. When it stalls, it helps you keep it going. And you end up achieving what you hope to achieve. Now, I don't want anybody to walk away with the impression that you have to do a structured change management or that you're not going to achieve any results, because you will. The issue is, will you always achieve all the efficiencies that you expect to by spending this amount of time and money and resources on the change? Because ultimately, if you're going to invest your people and your time and your energy, you want to make sure that you achieve as many of the results as you had planned. And that's really the point of this slide. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is give you a very high level view, an overview of the methodology. All right, and the first thing, as I said, present the future solution. Why do we want to do that? Well, we want to make sure that we're all working towards the same thing. And I'm going to give you, again, an example from your lives. If I were to say to a room full of people, that I want to lead a healthier life, And then I went around the room and I said to you, what does that mean? And normally this is something I would do. One of you might say, oh, I want to stop eating meat. And somebody else might say, I want to exercise 3 times a day. Sorry, not three times a week, sorry. Somebody else might say, well, I want to reduce my blood pressure by 10 points. Unless we quantify and say specifically what we mean by living a healthier life, everybody in that room is going to walk away with a different idea of what that means. So when you're starting a change, you want to present the solution right up front and make sure we all understand the terminology, we've quantified in a way that we understand what that means. Okay, so we want to have the solution. We want to engage stakeholders. I'm not going to go into that again, but obviously, as we talked about, you want to have them on board and you want to have their input. And then we want to foster a sense of ownership. Okay, why do we want to do that? Well, because common knowledge and best practice is that people who are invested in a project are more invested in its success. I used to have a client, and he would always say to the staff, that we are going to make a change is not up for discussion. How we make the change is up to you. And what he was telling them is it's futile to try and argue. The change is happening, so that's a good thing. People need to accept that. But you also have control over how that change happens. And people need to have a sense of control over their lives. They want to be involved. Okay, so now we want to build momentum. And why do we want to build momentum? This goes back to earlier when I talked about, because everybody's enthusiastic at the beginning and everybody's on board, and then they get pulled and distracted and other priorities come along. And you want to have somebody whose job it is to make sure that if there's an impediment, if there's a problem, they keep it going. They keep it on track. They check with people. How's it going? Somebody may say, oh, we need to buy a certain type of software. Okay, let's make sure that we get that software. We need some expertise that we don't have in-house. Okay, we got to get that expertise. I need to borrow somebody from another department. Those kinds of things. You want to keep the momentum going. You don't want it to get stalled. All right, and you're going to support implementation. And that's providing the resources, as I mentioned earlier, to keep the project on track. There's always one person who's going to be in charge of driving the change. And that's the person who also has the authority to approve funding, to approve the expertise, to approve transfers. And that person is invaluable. Then you also have another person who's going to be the one that's going to be doing the external communication and the internal communication and making sure that people understand why this change is so important and why it needs to be done. All right, and we're going to continue improvements. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, doesn't this contradict? Paulette said earlier that we have to have an end in sight. We have to have a desired end in sight. And now you're talking about continuing improvement. How do those two things match up? Well, because as you know, we never get it right perfectly 100% of the time. And also, once you make some improvements, then you realize there are other improvements that need to be made. And in this day and age, we talk about continuous improvement. So once you see how everything works, then you say, you know what? Now that we have this new process in place in HR, we realize, oh, we need to change how we do the budgeting, or things like that. In our personal lives, we call it the "you might as well as" syndrome. As long as I'm changing the wallpaper in the kitchen, I might as well change the floor. And if I'm changing the floor, I might as well get some new appliances. So the same thing holds true in organizations. You always want to look, how can we be better? How can we improve? How can we make changes? And that actually is a skill, a core skill that many managers need to have to understand how to continuous improvement for their departments. And as I said earlier, you have to have the data to measure our progress so we know when we've arrived. And the example I gave about living a healthy lifestyle, you want to set those goals and quantify them at the beginning of the project. It's not something that you're going to be doing at the very end of the project. because you're going to be measuring throughout and you're going to be reporting throughout, especially if it's a long-term project. If it's going to go on for like 6 months or a year, you're not going to wait to the very end to see where do we stand. You're going to be measuring throughout so that you can correct. You can make course corrections in the middle and say, oh, again, on paper, we thought this is something we need to do, but now we need to look at the strategy and change it. All right. I hope this, Nuria, are any questions coming in on any of this?
We do actually have a couple of questions. It's just, I didn't want to interrupt you. We started with a question from Henry.
Okay.
And he was asking, how would you advise organizations to change to adapt to the reality of the situation in anticipated layoffs, uncertainty, probably low work morale, and fear of job insecurity?
Yeah, that's a really difficult one. All right, so I'm assuming that the data, that the company has the data that shows that they absolutely must do layoffs, that they have no other choice. And the first thing I always talk to about managers, and I am going to talk about buy-in, but I'll just quickly, is one of the things that I say to managers over and over again when I work with them on a change is questions are good things. Because people, I find, can live with anything, even being laid off, even losing their jobs. But what they can't deal with is not knowing. What they can't deal with is uncertainty. So I always say to managers that you need to meet with staff throughout the change and tell them and be honest with them and tell them what's happening and tell them what's coming. Because when you don't provide information and you don't meet with staff, do the questions go away? No. What happens to them? They go underground and you have the rumor mill. And human nature being what human nature is, then the rumors are going to be much worse than the reality. So if, let's say, a company was planning on laying off 10% of its staff, if the managers don't meet with staff, the rumor mill is going to say that the whole business is shutting down. And I've seen it happen. What I usually say to the managers are always afraid because they're like, we don't have all the answers. And I tell them, you don't have to have all the answers. What you have to do is tell people what you know now and commit to them that as you know more, you'll provide more. Because you know what? If you're going to wait until you have all the answers, the change will be over. Nobody ever has all the answers, when they're going through the change. So if they know there's going to be layoffs, they have to start preparing people. And and again, like I said, we're going to get to this in a minute in buy-in, but one of the things you have to do is address people's concerns, address the elephant in the room, talk about it, and then talk about what the organization is going to do to help people. Are they going to help retrain them? Are they going to put them in touch with recruitment agencies to help them find other jobs? And that type of information is really useful. And like I said, people can deal with that, but they can't deal with not knowing. I think what I should do is move on to get to the buy-in, because I think I might be able to deal with a lot of,
Perfect.
How timely. All right, so I have this concept, I have this idea. Now the literature will talk about resistance to change. A lot of you may have heard that term. I don't agree with that term. I don't like it, and I don't think it's accurate. To me, resistance is fear, pure and simple. What I find is most people don't want to be difficult. Yeah, there's always a few that want to be difficult, but most people really want to do the right thing. They want to help, they want to be useful, they want to help the organization, but they're afraid because they don't know what's going to happen. And so they don't always buy into the change because they're afraid for their own futures. And that's what you see. And some people may interpret that as resistance, and they need to understand that that's not really the case. And I'm going to give you some examples of the types of fears. And again, if you yourselves are in charge of managing a change, driving a change, this is really useful information for you to know. Nuria, we didn't tell them, but they're going to have access to the presentation. So
yes, it's through the recording. Yeah.
Right, because I won't be able to go through everything. But loss of control, of power, of authority, and career opportunities are some of the big ones that come up. Now, when you say, well, what do you mean by loss of career opportunities? Let's say during a change, an organization decides to cut out an entire middle level of management. And you were sitting there and you knew that when your boss retired, you were next in line for promotion. Now, all of a sudden, that level is gone, and the promotion you were counting on or you thought you were going to get is no longer there. Well, how do you think that employee is going to feel? How do you think that staff member is going to feel? They're going to be upset, right? They might be angry, they might be demotivated. Whatever it is, you need to address that. And what I always say to people when I work on a change is, we're going to address all your concerns. We may not address them to your satisfaction, but we're going to address them. I mean, clearly, if the middle level of management is gone, it's gone, and there's nothing you can do to bring it back. But you have to sit with that person, acknowledge what they're feeling, and talk about some strategies for that individual. Maybe they need to apply for promotions in other departments. Maybe it's time for them to job hunt. Maybe they need to learn other skills. I don't know. Sometimes you have to develop buy-in strategies for individuals. Sometimes it's for groups, sometimes it's for departments. It's going to change. So these are some of the things you have to be aware of. And then there's fears. Fear of failure, fear of not having the right skill set, fear of success. And again, an example from my own experiences working with different individuals, I worked in one place that was putting in a new system. And some of the older members of the department were nervous because they had worked manually for many years and they were afraid of computers. Like, I have a son who's 28 years old. When you put in a new software or a new app, he's like, I don't need training. I don't need a manual. He just wants to sit in front of the computer and play around with it, and he's fine. And then you have people like me who sometimes feel that if we touch the wrong button, we're going to explode. So it's not that older people aren't smart. I don't want to give that impression. But sometimes they're a little nervous when it comes to dealing with technology. And that was the case in this change project I was doing. And I remember her saying to me, I've worked with this organization over 20 years. I gave up vacations. I gave up, my life or whatever. And now, because I don't know how to use a keyboard, I'm worthless. I have no value to the company. And I really felt for her. And whether I agreed with her or not, or whether I thought she was being overly dramatic, the point is, as change managers, we need to understand that that's what people are thinking and that's what they're feeling, and we have to address it. And we can't just dismiss it and say, well, that's absurd. Of course not. Of course you're going to be able to use this software. Of course you're going to be able to use a keyboard. We need to understand. And sometimes, as I mentioned, the strategies are different. Sometimes they could be different for different genders, sometimes for different cultures, sometimes for different ages. And you need to think about who your stakeholders are and what are the different changes, what are the different strategies that you need to get their buy-in. Okay, and fear of success might seem like a strange one, but again, going back to the literature, unfortunately, it shows that a lot of times this has to do with women being nervous about taking on additional responsibility and not having enough faith, not having enough confidence in their own abilities. And you need to think about that as well and address that as well. Okay, I hope this is clear. If not, we will address it when we get to the... Okay, so what are the components for soliciting buy-in? If you're driving a change and you want to get buy-in to your change, what are the things you need to do? As I mentioned earlier, identify organizational culture changes. I've had clients who say, I want you to create a culture of teamwork. I want you to create a culture of communication. I want you to create a culture of transparency. Whatever it is, we need to identify. They have a term, then we have to say, okay, what does that look like? What does that feel like? What does that sound like? How do we know if it's working? How do we measure? How do we measure if we have a culture of teamwork? These are things that can be done, but at the very beginning, you say, okay, we need to identify what needs to be changed. Do we have secrecy? You know, we always hear that information is power, and people keep all their information in their desks, and they don't share it. And that way, nobody can ever fire them because they're the most valuable people in the company. All right, how do we change that? How do we empower people to make decisions? Maybe people are always sending every decision up the chain to the boss to decide. Well, what is the reason for that? Is it because in the past, when people have made the wrong decision, they've been punished, they've been fired? Are people risk averse? Okay, these are all questions that you need to ask at the very beginning to see what are the organizational culture changes that we want. And every organization is different. You know, doctors have a different organizational culture than teachers and social workers and lawyers and politicians and, you know, window washers and people who pave the road. Everybody has a different culture, and I'm sure that you even know what the changes are that need to be made within your organization. But before you start the change, you say, okay, what do we need to change in this organization so that we can operate more efficiently? All right, I hope that's clear. If not, we'll get to it. Raise awareness, update on progress. Excuse me. We talked about this a little bit earlier. You want to keep the change at the forefront of everybody's mind. You want them focused on it. You want them involved. And you want to let them know that even though it doesn't seem like we're making progress because we have so much to do, in fact, these are all the things that we've already done. And just, you know, keep people involved and constantly focused. All right, managing expectations. In a change, you're constantly managing different expectations of all your stakeholders. And you're managing up and you're managing down. So what do I mean by that? Well, you're managing up to your managers, and then you're managing down to the people who report to you. And you're going to have two different strategies for managing those expectations. Because what does your manager want? Obviously, you can't answer me. That's a rhetorical question. Your manager wants this to be done now. They want the change to be implemented. They want it over. And what I'm constantly having to say to managers throughout a change is productivity goes down, not up, after the change is implemented, because they think, oh, we're going to put in this new system, whether it's a technology or whether it's a process or whatever it is. And as soon as we flip the switch on day one, boom, everything's going to be working perfectly. No, it doesn't work that way. You have to do training. People need to adapt. You have to fix little bugs. If any of you have ever been involved, you know what I'm talking about. So one of my ways of managing expectations is constantly telling managers productivity is going to go down for the first few weeks or the first month or whatever. Okay, so that's my bosses. What is it that I'm going to be telling the staff? We have to manage expectations. And as we talked earlier, they need to know how it's going to affect them. And is it going to be good for them? And then will there be new opportunities? And will there be opportunities for promotions or to learn new skills or to make changes? Or is an expectation that once we have this process in place, I can go home every day at 5 o'clock and be with my family, that I won't have to work so much overtime? Whatever it is, you have to understand what these expectations are. And again, you have to address them. So if there's a theme that should be coming through here, it's communication, communication, communication. That's a lot of what it has to do with in terms of driving change. All right, so we talked, I'm not going to spend time again. You want to get feedback from people. You want to know how things are going. Do they understand? And you want to manage the rumor mill and make sure that the communication and the information is coming from you. You're controlling the communication, making sure that they're not hearing all these perceptions and rumors and stuff from other people. Okay, we talked about addressing concerns regarding the change. You can see this is somebody who really does not want this change to take place. And believe me, I've had to deal with people like this in the past. And they do exist, and you are going to have to deal with them when you're managing a change. Okay, and if you have to, not always, I don't want you to think you always have to do training, but you might have to provide some training, and that's a good thing. All right, so why are managers against buy-in? If we've just talked about the fact that we want to get everybody's buy-in into a change, why does management oppose it? Again, it's not logical. Goes back to my thing earlier about when you have data about smoking, why don't people stop smoking? Well, basically, managers think that it's going to take too long. We're just going to tell people what to do, and they're just going to do it. Wishful thinking, right? If you forget about the people side of things, most change management projects fail on the people side, not on the process, not on the procedure, not on the technology. You remember the very first slide, or the second slide, I guess, with the security kiosks? Okay, people can undermine a change. So it's nice that they think that this is the case, but it's not. So you have to let them understand that it's not going to take much longer, and in the long run, it's actually going to save you time if you get the buy-in from everybody up front. And the other thing is that a lot of times managers don't want to get buy-in because they're afraid of people challenging them, as I mentioned earlier, and they don't feel that they have all the answers. Sometimes that's why they bring me in as a consultant. A, because I'm not going to get upset if they challenge me. I have very thick skin and I'm not worried about people being angry because I understand where the anger is coming from. It's coming from a place of fear. And also because I don't have a vested interest. If I say that this control of this department should go to this area, it's not because I have a friend in this area. So I'm going to be making decisions that are neutral. Okay, I hope this is clear to everybody. We're getting any questions on this? Okay.
We have actually quite a few questions already piling up, but in any case,
we only have a few slides left. I'm not going to go through all this. You will have this in your slide presentation, and basically what it means, what it just reinforces: don't avoid interacting with people because you have bad news to give. And there's an expression, at least in the States, if you want love, get a puppy. Don't expect approval from people when you're going through the change. All right, so quickly, I have all of these. I'm just going to talk about the first one, which is an acronym called WIIFM. And if anybody wants to write in quickly in the chat what they think this acronym stands for, and I'll move on a little bit and I'll come back to it at the end. And if has anybody guessed yet? WIIFM? No? Okay, so the other thing is recognize small achievements. As we said, constantly have update and progress, and don't be overly ambitious in scope. Don't let a project drag on forever and ever. Try and do it. If you have a lot of things to change, try and do it in phases. Break it up into manageable bits, because people going through change forever, you have something that's called change fatigue. They just get worn out and they can't deal with it anymore. All right, do we have any guesses?
Yeah, we do have a few guesses of what is in for me and what if I find muscle.
I like that.
Yeah.
It's what's in it for me.
What is it for me?
The reason this is important is because we are essentially self-interested. Human beings are essentially self-interested. And you can say to them, this is going to be better for the company. The company is going to make more money, or the company is going to get more clients, or the company might be able to satisfy its, board of governors or whatever it is, or the stockholders. But at the end of the day, people are going to say, that's great for the company, and I'm really happy for this organization. But what's in it for me? How do I benefit from this? As I said, am I going to learn new skills? Am I going to make more money? Am I going to get a promotion? Is my life going to be less complicated? Am I going to get out of here at a decent time so I can spend time with my family? What do I get out of this change? And as change managers, you need to be ready to address that question, because guaranteed, it will come up. It is something that people are going to ask. And you need to find out what that is. Okay, so this is my last slide. What is the role of leadership in a change? Let's say you're the consultant, you're the person that's driving the change. So you have executive management or senior management that's going to set the priorities and expectation. Basically, it's going to set give the guidance on what the high level expectations are, and they're going to communicate what the value is, why we need to do this, why we've decided as a company or as an organization that we need to do this. And then the senior management need to make sure that it happens. Need to provide the resources, need to provide the staff, need to hold people accountable for the day-to-day. And, if there are obstacles that come up, they need to unstick them. Okay. So again, it was a lot of information to take in a very short time period, and I commend you all for hanging in there. And why don't we open it up for questions? I'm going to stop sharing the screen unless you think I need to keep it open.
Oh, you can stop sharing if you wish. You can see Paulette's email address in the screen. So if anybody has any questions that wants to direct later on to Paulette, you can certainly write to her. You also have our email address, so feel free to write to us, and we also are in touch with Paulette. So thank you for this super interesting talk. We do have a few questions for you, and some of them are challenging. So we'll start with this one. How does organizational culture influence change management?
That's an interesting question. Okay, so I'll give you an example. I assume everybody heard the question. So I will give you an example. So as I said, let's say you have a culture where people do not work in teams, okay? And in order to make this change, you need people to be able to work in teams. They need to sit down as a group and say, this is the process that we need to put in place. And you need everybody on the team. You need all their input. Okay, if they're not used to working in teams, it's not going to work. Let's say you have one person in the team who usually dominates all the conversation, doesn't let anybody else talk, doesn't allow anybody else to have any input. Okay, if the other people who need to provide the input are not allowed to do that, then how good is this strategy for change going to be ultimately? It's not. So you need to address that. You need to say, okay, we have to talk about this organizational culture where we don't work very well as a team and we don't support each other. And by identifying it and coming up with the strategy, that's going to help you develop your change strategy and your communication strategy. And as I mentioned earlier, you can measure it. At some point, you can start looking, is this working? Oh, no? Okay, maybe we need to go back to square one. Maybe we identified the wrong organizational culture change, and then we need to see. So you're constantly revisiting things throughout the change and refining and improving. Okay.
Thank you, Paulette. We also have a question.
First,
oh, sorry, my apologies.
I hope that answered. Whoever it is, they can unmute themselves.
It's actually Sudam is right next to you in the screen.
Hi, did that answer your question? Yes? Okay, good. Okay, next.
We've got, if you can kindly highlight again, fear of success.
That's an interesting one, isn't it? There's been a lot of studies done on this, and like I said, it generally tends to be more women who are afraid in a change. If they get moved up and they have to take on more responsibility, and it's something that makes them nervous, they may choose not to move to another department or to leave the company altogether because they can't deal with the anxiety. You have to know that, because if somebody comes to you and says, you know what, I want to transfer, or I want to do something different, or whatever, you need to kind of get to the bottom of this and say, what's happening? This person was always happy. Now we're going through this change. They were one of my best people. I was even thinking about promoting them, and now they want to leave. Like, how does that work? Okay, so it's like a probing a little bit. You have to be a little bit of an investigator. You need to probe a little deeper and say, what's behind this? What's behind these questions? What's behind these concerns? I really need to get the bottom of this. I really need to understand it. Okay? And it, you know, it takes time. It's not going to happen the first time you do it, but eventually. Okay.
Thank you,
Whoever that was, I
Paulette.
hope I answered their question.
We have another interesting question is how can we integrate the vulnerable population, such as those in refugee camps and a stateless population in change process?
Okay, that's a great question. All right, so you're talking about people that I'm assuming have not had a lot of control over their lives for a while. And one of the things you need to understand, change is a very scary thing. It's scary to everybody, and more so when you're talking about vulnerable populations. And you have to start with baby steps. You have to start very small. I had a friend actually who worked in Kenya, and she worked with a village helping them to govern themselves. And she started out very small, like creating a governing council and getting them to make, you know, relatively simple, minor decisions, and, you know, building confidence and letting them feel more comfortable with their changes, and then seeing, oh, I made this change and the world didn't explode. I made this decision and the world didn't explode, because people are always afraid of the consequences. And we didn't spend a lot of time talking about failure, but, you know, sometimes you fail and people need to be okay with that. And management needs to tell people that they're okay with that. And you build up confidence. And as they see, you know, there's another theory in change management called change resilience. And what does that mean? In other words, if I go into an organization that had gone through a change management effort a few years earlier, if it was successful, then what I'm going to see is the people who I'm interacting with are positive about change, they're excited about change, they want to change, they're enthusiastic, they want to be involved. If they had a disastrous experience of change, I'm going to be meeting with an entirely group of people. And I know that my strategy has to have built into it the fact that people are going to be unhappy and afraid and whatever, and it might take me longer to do, you know, to start my strategy. So you need to be aware of that. And so you start small, you get people used to the idea of making certain decisions for themselves, and then you build on that. You build on your successes, basically. I hope that helps whoever asked.
And to what extent should change managers impose change? So they're talking about how much you push them to maintain a balance.
That's a fabulous question. I don't know who asked that. I always tell
this is from Leila, yeah.
Leila, okay. Where are you? Right there. Hi. Okay, so I always tell my clients you can't impose change. You really, I mean, if I have a senior manager very high up in the organization and he wants to impose change 3 levels down, it's practically impossible. So what happens is you have to build a case for change. You need to build a case. You need to explain. If you're just doing it, I always say change for change's sake doesn't work. If you don't have a solid reason for doing it, and if you can't really articulate how things will be better at the end of the change, then don't do it. I always tell my clients, don't go down that road. Don't create all this upheaval and anxiety and whatever, if at the end of the day, it's just going to be a little bit better, because it's just not worth the effort. And I'll give you a very quick example. When I came to Israel, I was hired by an organization, and I traveled back to the States to work with somebody. And this person was not receptive at all to anything we wanted to do. Technically, he was very competent, but he was not receptive to any changes we want to make. And when I went back and I reported to them and I said, look, you have 2 choices. This person is not going to change. You can either get rid of this person or accept whatever, few things that they do that you're not happy with, even though you know that technically they're very good and they get the job done. And they were very surprised. They said, oh, you're a consultant and you're turning down work. But I wasn't going to take their money. So it's really hard if you don't think you're going to be able to get the buy-in for whatever reason, because you don't have a very good case for change, you don't have a very good solution, you don't have the data to support the reason, you know, like they say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And but managers at a senior level, they see that the change is needed. There are ways that they can convince others within the organization that it needs to be done, and they can support the change. But just trying to impose it, it very rarely works. Again, you can go back to you know, certain examples I said earlier with people who have all the data and still continue to smoke. You know, they need to understand the reason, and they need to internalize it. Okay.
Okay, we'll just take one or two more questions because we're running out of time. So we've got another question on buy-in. Do you need to incentivize to seek the buy-in and how to draw a balance?
Great, another great question. These are all fabulous questions. Okay, so incentivize, I'm assuming you're talking monetary incentive. And again, if you look at the literature, monetary incentives do not take you very far. They really don't, because the first time the person has the raise in their paycheck, great, and then from there on in, they start to take it for granted. So monetary incentives really don't help with the change. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but the ways to incentivize, I talked about earlier, carrot and stick, is by letting people know why you're doing it, how it's going to benefit them on a daily basis, how it's going to benefit the organization, why the change is needed. It's really about communication, convincing people, and as I said, you have to articulate why things will be better after you've gone through that change. That's what people want to know.
Thank you, Paulette. I don't know if it's possible to do this right now very quickly. It's just Leila wanted to ask something about one of your earlier slides. If it's possible for you to share the beginning of your presentation.
You can just tell me. I know them by heart, so you can just tell me. Can you unmute, Leila?
Leila, well, I need to find her. Hold on a second. Give me 2 seconds. I'm looking for her. Just give me a second and I'll ask her to unmute. I've asked her to unmute.
Okay, Leila.
There she is.
Okay, hi. How are you?
Hello, hello. First of all, thank you very much. I am one of Mashav's alumni from previous years, back in 2006, and I always enjoy. It made me a very good favor in terms of development in my career, and I will always be thankful for this experience from Jerusalem, Ramat Rachel. Can I see the very beginning of the slide? I had a question there, and I just want to...
I've already closed the screen.
Okay.
You remember what the question was by any chance?
Okay, so
should we come back to you if you're not sure?
No, I am sure. Simply, I just wanted to recall it right from there. But what role do the members of the team play in change management? You know, we are not solitary individuals in an organization. We are a team, and good things happen always when we have someone around. But sometimes many ideas and too many cooks spoil the broth. So can I have your practical kind of advice or reply to what extent this change management team is a luxury or prevention from change? Thank you.
It really depends on the change and how your management has set up the change. I'm not really sure what your role in the organization is. If you say you're on the change management team, generally there will be a person who heads the team who hopefully has experience in change management, and that person will meet with the team and talk about individual roles. And it really varies depending, every change is different. Some people like to, control every aspect of the change, to control the strategy. Other times they'll delegate authority and they might say, Leila, I want you to be in charge of communication, and somebody else might be in charge of the process. So it really varies, and there's no right or wrong answer. You know, that you can set up all the teams in a lot of different ways. The most important thing is to make sure that the team members, each one knows what their role is, what their responsibilities are, what their, you know, what's expected of them, and what they expect from the other members of the team. I'm sorry it's such a fuzzy answer, but kind of, you know, it really varies from situation to situation.
Thank you very much. Very useful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Noria?
Yes, thank you very much. I think we're pretty much out of time. There is a few people that are asking for your presentation. So I asked everybody if they want the presentation to please write in the chat their email address, and we will be happy to forward it to them directly. So
Great.
if you share with MCTC your presentation, we can then forward it to them by email. So
I will do that.
I wanted to thank you, Paulette, very, very, very much for being with us this afternoon. It's been really wonderful.
You're welcome. I hope it was useful and helpful.
It was very useful. It was very interesting. You have a lot of comments of thanks and appreciation for your lecture today. And we want to thank all our participants this afternoon, morning, evening, for being here with us. It's absolutely wonderful seeing you all. And thank you so much for continuing supporting our activities. We do have other lectures coming up during this month. So feel free to check our social media and join us whenever you're free. So thanks again to everybody. Just if anybody else wants to write their email addresses, because I'm going to save the chat, and then we can send you that wonderful presentation by Paulette. Thank you so much for being with us.